Okay, I think we'll make a start. So welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for taking time to join us. My name is Jemima Rees-Evans. I'm Director of the Charles Dickens Research School, and I'm joined today by David Windle and Nicola Jacobs from Charles Dickens Primary School, who are the programme designers. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the admin and logistics, and then I'm going to hand over to them to talk through the actual programme itself. If you have any questions at all, please do post them into the chat, and we'll try and monitor that at the same time as presenting the information. But if we don't get to your question, we'll come to it at the end. So, as I said, you are all very welcome. This is what we're going to cover in this session, and it's very much we're going to be just giving information. It's not really hugely interactive, but it's serving the purpose. So I'm sure you'll forgive us for that. We're going to do an overview of the project, what the project is, what it involves. Then I'll be handing over to David, who'll talk through the rationale of why should we focus on fluency and what the supporting evidence is for that, for improving pupil outcomes. Then Nicola will be talking through the Fluency Focus lesson sequence and the strategies. Then I'll be talking about what you might get for your school from joining into the project, which will be around the training, the resources, the ongoing support. Then I'll be talking about what we will need from you if you decide to join us on this journey, which I hope you will. And then there'll be time at the end for to consider next steps and any questions that you might have. So I'm going to start with a project overview, and hopefully most of you will have some idea of this already from some of the materials that you've already seen. So Fluency Focus, which is our reading fluency research project, is a suite of 20 fully resourced whole class reading lessons to be delivered one per week over 10 weeks. It's designed for Year 5 students, and each lesson includes the explicit teaching of fluency strategies, but with some comprehension aspects embedded, and we'll talk about why that is a bit later on. There's an initial training day, and then there's ongoing support. There's a baseline and end of programme assessment of pupils' fluency and comprehension. But the focus of this as a research project being funded by the EEF is to evaluate the feasibility and acceptability to teachers and senior leaders. Can I just remind you, please, to mute if you're not sharing with the whole group. So we have already done a small scale trial of the lesson resources of the programme. We did that with a group of 10 schools in the East Midlands in the summer of 2022, sharing some of our findings from that. But that was considered by the EEF to be promising enough to allow us to scale up and do this bigger pilot of 20 schools in South London and the South East. But the focus still remains on feasibility and acceptability. At this point, the formal evaluation is not on pupil outcomes. So just really clear on that. And when I talk about feasibility and acceptability, this is what we mean. So the acceptability of the project for schools, did the approaches address an area of priority for you? Is this an important thing for you? Sorry, can I just ask you to mute?
Sorry, apologies.
No problem. And was it plausible that the approaches addressed that area effectively? So that's the acceptability piece of evaluation. And then the feasibility is, were you able to teach the lessons as planned? Did they make sense? Did you understand the programme? Did the training and resources support delivery effectively? So those are our research questions for this project. And this is what the delivery timeline really looks like. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've got split into 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 7 weeks. So that's 20 weeks in total of lessons. And that will start around the end of autumn 1 and go into the end of spring or summer 1 as well. And that's split into 3 phases. So the first 5 weeks of lessons are very much the establish phase, so getting to grips with all of the new strategies, then 8 weeks on embedding those, and then the last 7 weeks on extending those skills. And then you can see the yellow boxes indicate the training and support that's available. So before we launch into lesson delivery, there's 1 day of face-to-face training. And then a couple of weeks in, we have one-to-one coaching conversations. And then throughout the programme, we have 3 webinars, and those webinars serve 2 purposes. One is for troubleshooting, so sort of responding to what we've heard through those coaching conversations around what might be challenges for schools and adapting accordingly. And one will be more proactive, introducing new strategies and new skills as we move between each of those phases of delivery. And then you can see that the centre purpley movie chunk is that 20 weeks of lesson delivery. And then over to the green are the evaluation activities that we'll be asking you to complete. So we'll start before lesson delivery with baseline evaluations, and those will be assessing teachers' confidence and their knowledge of fluency. We'll have weekly logs, so after every lesson, we'll ask teachers to complete a really short evaluation form. A couple of lesson observations, and that's really just seeing which of those strategies, how each of the strategies is landing in the classroom. And then end of programme evaluations, where we'll be running focus groups and surveys. So that's the overall structure of the programme. I'm now going to hand over to David, who's going to talk us through a little bit the rationale and the evidence. So over to you, David.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what fluency is from our point of view and from the EEF's point of view, and then talk a bit about some of the evidence we've drawn upon to get this program together. So as you can see there on that slide, this is defined in the Key Stage 2 guidance report for EEF. Reading fluency has 3 key components: accuracy of reading, so reading words accurately and correctly. And then you build on that and develop automaticity. So that does require children to be reading accurately already. And that enables children to read at the appropriate speed, and things start to feel effortless and automatic. And then finally, the final attribute, prosody, which is when it all comes together and when you read with expression and intonation and the right emphasis as well. So those three things all make fluent reading, and they're kind of cumulative. One builds upon the other as well. So that's what we're going for. That is reading fluency, and that's what we're hoping to get children to do and to benefit from. So we looked at the Key Stage 2 guidance report as a starting point for our evidence, which says that fluent reading supports comprehension because pupils' cognitive resources can be redirected from focusing on word recognition to understanding the text. So it's as simple as that, really. Children are not struggling to decode words. They're not battling with new long words and trying to just sort of get their mouths around them. They're not using up all their resources to do that. So they actually are able to start understanding the words that they're saying and how the text comes together, because those sort of more basic skills are taken care of, and they have some familiarity with the words that they're saying. And in that sense, fluency can be regarded as a bridge from word recognition to comprehension. But it is actually more complicated than that, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Which comes first, fluency or comprehension? You kind of need one to have the other in a way. They feed into each other. But I suppose traditionally what we've done is not focus so much on teaching fluency. We focus on sort of using skills to comprehend a text. But actually, if we start teaching fluency and teaching through fluency, we kind of bring those two things together much earlier in the process. And that's what we're trying to do with this program. There aren't any quick ways to develop reading fluency. You just have to practice it. You have to be explicitly taught how to do it, and children have to have it modeled for them, be shown how to do it, be encouraged to practice it. And then once that is established, they can start really benefiting from it in terms of it enhancing their ability to understand texts and to explore texts and to enjoy text as well, and to enjoy reading and reading aloud and reading for other people. So that's kind of what our program is all designed to make happen. And there's quite a lot of evidence around things which I'm sure as teachers we sort of do all the time anyway in lots of ways. Guided oral reading instructions. So fluent reading of a text is modeled by an adult who reads it very fluently, and that the child hears that, and they then read that same piece of text back. So they've heard a model already. Modeling, very thing we're all very familiar with. And Repeated reading. Pupils reread a short and meaningful passage a set number of times until they're able to reach a certain level of fluency with it. So as you can see, some of the techniques are quite simple, and it's just a case of practicing them and embedding them into a system and a systematic way of teaching with them. Nicola's going to talk more about all the nuts and bolts of how it works in a minute. So we ran the previous trial with 10 schools, I think it was, and this is some of the feedback from teachers. So this is evidence about how much they loved it. This quote here, very nice quote: "My understanding about reading has been extended, and fluency in particular. I think so much focus has been given to comprehension and being able to answer comprehension question. As a result, the essential skill of fluency, which reduces cognitive load, is often missed or not given due attention." So we're just shifting that focus with this project, really. We're giving you a way of focusing on that element of fluency when you're teaching reading. The next quote here, it says, "By using the phrased reading exercise," which Nicola will go into later, but it's essentially breaking the text down into little chunks, "I now understand how children can learn about the reading of the text and also how that links into the meaning of the reading. The paired reading has allowed me to see how much the children gain from reading to a trusted partner. For the less confident child, this is fantastic." So that's, again, a really important part of this, is because everybody's practicing together. No child is sort of on their own reading aloud. Everyone's doing it chorally. So children who may struggle or lack confidence, they're brought along with the whole group. And if children feel that they can't access the text or don't understand it, this is a really nice way in for children, where they're not having to really think too much about the meaning to start with. They're just sort of playing with the sound and the music of it, really. So it does help across the board. And this one here, "I now understand the benefit of teaching reading fluency, both in terms of pupils reading and also to improve their writing. Phrase marking the text has been very useful for pupils to understand where to pause. This has helped both their expression when reading aloud, and they're able to identify where a comma should go when writing a sentence, which is always challenging." So yes, it has a knock-on effect as well, because they're exploring text in that very live way as a piece of communication. It also then influences their writing, because they start thinking about writing in a similar way. It's for an audience. So it has that knock-on impact too. "It's been a rewarding experience to be involved in an exciting project where good progress has been made by all the learners in my class." That's what we're going for, isn't it? Exciting projects where everyone makes progress. So I think that's pretty good feedback. Okay, let's move on. And within the project, there's an assessment you do at the beginning and at the end, which we'll talk a bit more about further on, where you read with a child and you just assess them on a rubric and give them a score for these things. And over the course of the project, the children's rate of reading, their accuracy, their prosody, which is the ultimate goal, the kind of expressiveness, and their comprehension, all increased, which is reassuring.
David, can I jump in there, please?
Please do.
I'm just going to caveat this data a little bit, so that we're not over-claiming, because it's really important to say that in the initial evaluation, this assessment of changes in pupil fluency, that was not the core focus. We really wanted to look at that because we thought that was an important part of how motivated teachers would be. But it's really important to say this was a small sample size and we did not have a control group. So we can't say what would have happened if those schools had just sort of continued with business as usual. So quite exciting and very motivating for participating teachers, but I don't think we wouldn't want to overclaim for that data. Thank you, David. Back.
That's okay, thank you. And within the program, there are opportunities to get children to feedback about their experience of it. There's 3 opportunities, one at the beginning, one at the end, I think one in the middle as well, where they do a survey. One of the questions, how much do you enjoy reading aloud? So reading aloud meaning with expression and fluently. And at the beginning, this particular child was a 1, they didn't enjoy it at all. And by the end, they'd gone off the scale. They'd got 6 out of 5. So they'd done they'd really loved it. So I think we found a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of joy and a lot of enjoyment that came from it as well, which I think is another benefit in terms of encouraging reading and encouraging children to read. All the schools continue to use the strategies and want to sort of weave them into their teaching, not just in the year group they were being trialed in. So that's a really good sign. And what does that one say? 9 out of 10 rolled out the approach more widely across the school in September 2022. So it's already happening. So essentially, I think we found that things were very feasible, and they were children and teachers were motivated to use these strategies and saw the benefits of them and enjoyed using them too. So that's what we hope you guys do as well. I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, who's just here, and she's going to talk a little bit about the program. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all. So as David said, I'm going to talk to you about what it actually looks like in your classrooms, in your year 5 classrooms. Before I do that, I just want to say that as a year 6 teacher, I have stolen all the strategies for myself. So once David and I designed the program, I thought, what better than to use them myself in the class? And I've been doing them since September. Really successful and loads of fun, and the children really, really enjoy them. So anecdotally, it's a lot of fun to be involved in, but let me explain what these strategies look like so you kind of can understand what we're waffling on about. So as David said, there is some good evidence for reading fluency, but there aren't very many programs for schools to use where fluency is explicitly taught. And this is where we came in. The EEF invited us to sort of develop a program around where there's quite a good evidence base, but not a lot of materials or programs. So this is where we came in with Fluency Focus. So it's our sort of interpretation of the evidence and how we could explicitly teach reading fluency to lead to those outcomes we've previously discussed. So moving on. As Jemima mentioned, it's 20 fully resourced reading lessons. So what I mean by that is you will get upfront training, you will get a guide, and every lesson will have a lesson plan. We give you the text, we give you PowerPoints. So everything is there for you. And it's over 20 weeks and it's in year 5. And as we will sort of explain, it's got a series of fluency strategies followed by comprehension questions. But as I said, it's all there for you. So it should not add to your workload at all. If anything, it should reduce it, hopefully. And the texts we've selected are a mix of some classic fiction, some poetry, and some quite challenging non-fiction. And we have gone quite high in terms of challenge because we think it makes it interesting, and it leads to it's quite interesting for you as a teacher to see that when there is a very challenging text, using the strategies to play with text and with language often leads to sort of a greater understanding than you would do if they were just reading the text sort of cold on their own. So that was the plan. So that's the program. If we move on, this is the sequence, sort of the key bit. And every one of these strategies is evidence-based. Further references I can give to you sort of later. They're all in the EEF guidance. Each lesson will follow this sequence, but I will say, because we've got 20 lessons, we don't throw them at the children all at once. So it's a sort of staged approach. Initially, we'll focus on the first 4, and then after those are sort of embedded, we then move on to doing the last couple sort of in time. So it's not this sort of crazy new approach all in one go. It's sort of quite carefully sequenced. And the way we designed the sequence was really thinking about where are those stumbling blocks? Where are the children going to sort of come across a barrier? And so we designed it to remove those barriers. So it sort of moves from whole class, very much the teacher, you holding what's happening and slowly, gradually giving the children increasing independence, but in a very sort of structured way. And as I said, we kind of remove each one of those stumbling blocks. So by the end, the children ideally are reading fluently independently. So next slide. This one you'll be doing all the time, I imagine, in your lessons. But the first one is introducing unfamiliar vocabulary. Obviously, it makes sense that to read the text fluently, children need to say the challenging words fluently. On the slide are just some examples of ways you can teach the unfamiliar vocabulary with an emphasis on reading out loud, but we'll go through that sort of in the initial upfront training. But it's really important that children know how to say a word and what the word means. So the emphasis is on reading it out loud and then giving them ideally a visual or an action attached to it. So the word is really clear so that anything new makes sense in the context of the text and they can understand the whole text altogether. So that's the first strategy. As I said, you're probably doing it all the time. Next up is model fluent reading, again, your bread and butter as a teacher, and it's really the most important strategy. This is where they are hearing really excellent fluent reading, and it's also enabling children to experience the whole text before you start breaking it up and sort of diving into it. So as you can see, before you even start, you would start doing that building on prior knowledge, explaining the text type, who the author is. You would then read it fluently with as much prosody as you can handle. We do find that the teachers who are frustrated actors tend to really love this bit. And then afterwards, you'll have a class discussion about what actually happened. Have they understood the whole text? What happened? What were the main events, the key characters? What were the children thinking or feeling? Just really kind of connecting with that text and the comprehension element. They've understood what it's about. Because of course, when they start reading out loud, they need to communicate the meaning of what they have just read and what you've just read to them. So that's the second strategy. As I said, you're doing a lot of that already. And then we get into something maybe a bit more unfamiliar, which is called phrased reading. We really love this actually, and the children really love it. So we automatically break text down into phrases without even realizing it. So a phrase is a meaningful unit of language. And here you've got a way of breaking down text to really think about what are those units, what are those phrases. So 1/ is a short pause, 2/ is a long pause. We've got a little example here from the Railway Children, which is one of our classic texts in the sequence. And you can see, it seemed to her that they had been standing there for hours and hours, holding those silly little red flannel flags that no one would ever notice. And it's a way of thinking about where are you pausing and why. Sometimes the pauses correspond with punctuation, sometimes they don't, and that's a really interesting discussion to have as well. But it's really helpful. The chunking of text and the breaking it down is a route into understanding far better, to be able to read out loud better and also to comprehend better. So that's phrase reading. And then echo reading sort of does what it says on the tin, but it's taking a section of text and it is you read it fluently to the children and they echo it back. Might be just one sentence, maybe 2 sentences to begin with. And they have to completely echo your fluent delivery. So if they sound like monotonous robots, which my year 6s did at the start of the year, you just have to go over it and over it until they're beginning to really get the sense of communicating meaning with voice. And this is really the bridge. You have been holding this lesson and it's very much been you modeling, talking and them listening. This is now handing over, and this is the first go at them beginning to own the reading and think about how they communicate using their voices. And it's good fun. It's pretty funny, I find, quite often. And again, you can start thinking about why you're reading in a particular way. Start thinking about author impact, author choice. So that is echo. And those are the first 4 that we will focus on in the early stages of the programme. And then once those are really embedded, the children are comfortable with it, you're sort of moving through the lesson quite smoothly, we introduce paired reading, which is just giving the children a chance to practice together. But again, we're really adamant that no child will read on their own unless they want to. So this is very low stakes. They read to each other, they give each other specific feedback, thinking about what they've already done in the lesson. So thinking about the phrase marking, thinking about the echo, how can they really get across the meaning using their voices? And they give each other feedback, and we can talk more about that in the upfront training, ways of scaffolding partner feedback so that it's constructive and helpful and not some of the other things that partner feedback can be if it's not modelled and carefully handled by the teacher. But that bit's, again, it's good fun. They work in their pairs. And then the final piece of the puzzle, we have our reading for performance. And this is sort of the icing on the cake, really. We've started with the teacher doing reading to the class, and now the children are reading to the class. There's heaps of different ways of doing this, and it really depends on the text. And again, what we're trying to get across with the meaning of text. You can do choral reading, so the whole class reading together. You can get children reading one at a time, reading around the class phrase by phrase. This is a perfect opportunity for drama. So a popular one is one child narrating what's happening while other children act it out. But there's lots of scope for different sort of activities. And again, it's all about is the children reading, bringing to life the text? Is it communicating what the text is about? And if they are achieving that, then, you know, the job is done really. And obviously the more fluently, the better. But it's very, very interactive, the whole lesson. It feels quite different from your sort of standard guided reading lesson. The children have a lot of fun with it because it's so interactive and it feels sort of like a whole class effort, and it's lots and lots of talking. It's kind of fizzy. It's good fun. So that is the strategies. And then to round things off, to check that all that hard work, breaking down the text, talking about the text, saying it out loud in pairs and all together has paid off. We end each lesson with just 3 comprehension questions. They will look like this. They won't necessarily be this because we've tailored them depending on what the text is. But the idea is to check that they have understood the text as a whole, and that they've started thinking about author choice. So what was the writer trying to achieve with the way they wrote it? And I think fluency lends itself so nicely to that, because in the reading out loud, if suddenly they're hushing their voice at a moment of suspense, you know, why did you go quiet then? Oh, because there's an ellipsis or the sentences are short. And they're sort of thinking, oh, wait, you know, these linguistic choices that the writer is making is leading me to make particular choices as a reader. And that's because they wanted to build this mood or this atmosphere. So it's very much thinking beyond just literal what actually happened through to some sort of bigger, quite challenging sort of secondary style thinking around why text has been constructed as it has been. So yeah, that's the comprehension element, and that's it. And each lesson is roughly an hour long. And you will find in the early stages, it takes a little longer as you're embedding the strategies, but it really, really speeds up. And by the end, you can be rattling through, we can rattle through the early strategies really quite quickly and then get into the sort of juicy stuff later and give that enough time to really play with it. Yeah, so that is it on the strategies and the design of each lesson.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Really clear explanation there, and of that sort of that fundamental part of the programme, which is helping children to communicate meaning through the way that they're reading. And that, of course, that's what it's all about, but that complex relationship between fluency and comprehension. I just wanted to pick up on something else Nicola said around the sort of the challenge of the Key Stage 2 to 3 reading transition. When we first trialled this, it was 10 lessons and they were all fiction, so classic stories and some poems. For this trial, we've expanded that to 20, and the 10 additional texts are all non-fiction texts. So they come from sort of history text, geography, RE, and science, really. And the thinking behind that was, as many of you will be familiar with the Oxford Word Gap research, which identified that when children move from year 6 to year 7, they don't just encounter greater complexity in the vocabulary, but 4 times as many words. And so there's a thing about really preparing our children to make that transition from to really reading for meaning. And really reading to access the curriculum. So that was the sort of the thinking. And we know, you know, especially in a lot of our schools in South London and in the Southeast, that our disadvantaged pupils find that particularly challenging, that word gap at Key Stage 2 to 3 transition. So that's really the thinking about trying to include some non-fiction texts and really thinking carefully about the text types that those children will encounter in Key Stage 3. So having said that, we're now going to have a little bit of a closer look about the training, the resources, the ongoing support that are available throughout the project. So we will start at the end of September. Our provisional date for this is the 28th of September, with 1 day of upfront training. And that's completely compulsory, that's sort of completely non-negotiable. We know from when we ran the initial trial with schools in the East Midlands that we had some teachers who came along to the training. Well, all 10 schools came along, but some teachers said, oh, can my partner teacher also do this? They were really keen that both of them did it. And those that didn't come to the initial training really struggled with it. It seems beautifully simple, the strategies and the way Nicola has explained it. And it's not rocket science. They are simple strategies, but it's really important that teachers come and have the training so they really understand how best to use the resources, how to get the most out of that. So throughout the 20 weeks as well, there are 2 coaching conversations. These will be online, half-an-hour coaching conversations that we'll arrange with myself, with Nicola, with David, and with our team of evidence leads of education attached to the Research School Network. And again, that's part of our evaluation. So that's part of us understanding how the programme is working in your schools, but also helps to feed into the webinar content. So if we have, more than 50% of schools or a sizable chunk of schools all flagging the same issue or all wanting to celebrate the same aspect of the programme, then that will feed into the webinar. So there's a real opportunity to sort of shape things as we go through it. So the 2 coaching conversations, the 3 webinars, both responsive to the feedback in the coaching conversations, but also there's additional content there. So we'll go a bit deeper into how best some sort of pedagogical approaches to teaching vocabulary. And we'll also, all of those are timed to be just as you move into the next phase of delivery. So looking a bit more closely at some of those strategies. As Nicola said, how things like how do we set children up to give really good and useful peer feedback? Because that can be a challenge if that's not something that's already embedded in that classroom. And then at the end of the programme, so this will be around early June, probably, we'll have a celebration event where we'll all come together and share experiences. And again, that's a really important part of our evaluation to help us understand your experiences of the programme and of the project, and how we could, what are the even better ifs, what was perhaps some of the unforeseen consequences, the surprising knock-on effects. I think one of those quotes that David shared earlier around improvements in children's writing was a really interesting observation that was shared with us by one of the schools, which was something that perhaps we hadn't anticipated at all. And then in terms of the sort of the resource package, so you get a teacher guide, a sort of a physical hard copy of the teacher guide, and 30 pupil booklets per class. And those are also available for you digitally. As Nicola said, the lesson slides, the teacher guide contains all the lesson plans. We'll send out a weekly email just sort of prompting, this is what's coming up, have a little think about these things. There's additional coaching available if that's helpful. And there's a website that will host all of these materials. And on that website, you'll also have all of the approaches modelled and explained. So those will be sort of an explainer of what each of the strategies is, and then what does that look like in a classroom? So modelled live with real children. So that's the resource offer. I realise what I haven't said in this is that we would like all of your year 5 teachers to do this, all of your year 5 classes. We're not running control groups. That's not what we're evaluating with this project. So if you're 2 form entry, great, we'd love both of your year 5 teachers to do it. If you're bigger, great, we'd love all of your year 5 teachers to do that. And that's partly that, the bigger sample, the more information we get, but also we find it really helps teachers if they've got someone in the school who's doing the same thing, that they can just sort of pop next door and sort of say, oh, how did you find this? Any top tips, that sort of supportive network. So those are the resources and the sort of the package of support. In terms of what we ask from you, this is what we need from your year 5 teachers. So attendance at all the training, and that's a real non-negotiable. 1 day of upfront training, the coaching conversations, the webinars, and the celebration event. Partly because we know that will be the best thing for your teachers; they'll get the most out of it, and therefore the children will get the most out of it as well. But also in terms of how we are evaluating this project, for us to get the very best information, we need you to be in the room with us. We need the delivery of the 20 lessons as planned. And when we go to that training day, that first training day, we'll talk about what are the tight elements of the programme, so the non-negotiables, the things that cannot be adapted, but we'll also talk about what are the loose aspects, what can you tweak, what can you change around a little bit, so we're really clear there. And then we need the teachers, we need you all to participate in the evaluation activities. So that will be completing a baseline survey, completing a baseline pupil assessment of 6 target children in each class. And from that, we'd ask two children from each of the high prior retaining, medium prior retaining and lower prior retaining groups, because we're really interested to understand their experience. Weekly logs, which are sort of a Google form, which pretty much has 3 questions on it. Mid and post program survey, mid and post program focus groups. So we're being formally evaluated, the program is being formally evaluated by the Centre of Evidence and Implementation, and they will be running these evaluation activities so they can really understand that, as I say, that feasibility, acceptability and fidelity piece. And the lesson observations. Now, the lesson observations are something that I haven't spoken about yet. I'm going to come on to those in just a second, because the other commitment that we really need you to make, and we know from experience that this is a real sort of support for success of a project, is we need there to be a member of SLT who is the SLT champion in your school. We need that member of SLT to attend the one-day upfront training so they really have a good understanding of the programme. And we need them to come to the celebration event because we're really interested to hear on that sort of whole school perspective. So you will have your perspective, or Year 5 teachers will have their perspective, and the senior leaders will have their perspective. And those are 2 perspectives that we really want to hear those experiences from. The SLT champions are also there to make sure that there is release time for the teachers to attend training and protected curriculum time. As Nicola said, it's 1 hour per week. So instead of, not additional to, one of your reading lessons, but really important that that's ring fenced and doesn't get knocked out by trips or cover or any other of the sort of the myriad wonderful things that happen in primary schools. And then we also need the SLT champions both to participate in and to promote those evaluation activities. So we want to hear from senior leaders. We need them to complete a baseline survey and a post-program survey. And then this is the point where I'll talk about these lesson observations. So we will be asking the senior leaders to do 2 lesson observations of their Year 5 teachers teaching Fluency Focus. And the reason for that is it's not evaluating what teachers are doing, but we want to see how much time each of those strategies takes within a fiction lesson and within a non-fiction lesson, and how the children respond at each of those points as well. And obviously, as a teacher, it's really difficult to do that, observing pupil response at the same time as teaching the lesson. So that's the purpose of that. It's very much a focus on the children and evaluating each of those strategies and the pupil response to each of those. So those are the lesson observation activities that we've got in both for the Year 5 teachers and for the SLT champions. So in terms of next steps and questions, I would say the next thing is speak to colleagues in your setting. This pilot, we have space for 20 schools, so we're allowed to recruit 20 schools. We're not allowed to recruit any more than that. So it's really important that you're sure that it's right for you before you sign up, and that you can, it's a priority for your school, and that you can make the commitment that we've asked for from you. I will post into the chat the link to sign up, but there's a QR code. I've posted the link into the chat. There's also the QR code there, which will take you to the formal registration. I know you've all completed an expression of interest, which is why you're here now, but this is the sort of the next step. And we'll ask you to complete that before half term, please. And then we will see if we have more than 20 schools, then we will that are interested in participating. We will consult with the EEF about selection criteria, and we'll be really transparent about criteria that we use for that. And then we'll send you, if your school is keen to participate and has been selected, we'll send you the memorandum of understanding, which sets out exactly in detail what we will do and what our commitment is and what your commitment is. And we'd ask for that to be returned to us by the 19th of June. I have recorded the session today, so we will circulate the slides afterwards, but I'm just going to go to the chat. I'm going to work backwards, I'm afraid. So can the 1 hour lesson be split across the week? the short answer is yes. One of the schools in the East Midlands trial did that. I can't remember off the top of my head whether they did it, how many sessions they did it into. Matt, how many sessions were you thinking of?
Well, over the week, so we teach reading sort of every day with different sort of skills. But could we take that 1 hour session and do it across every single day, like at the different parts of it?
I would say probably not to begin with, but possibly as it progresses. Nicola, I don't know what you think about that.
I think it'd be really difficult because you're building, and so to sort of do a bit and come away and then do a bit. The one who did it in Derby was doing over 2 half-an hours. So instinctively that feels quite difficult, but we'll talk more about it because no one's asked that before. But yes, I think the building on the flow, that feels quite hard to do when it's being sort of divided up. But leave it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a question about what about a year 4-5 mixed class? Well, if you have 6 year 5 pupils who can participate in the evaluation, that's fine. But I would say also the pitch is quite high. So it's a question there. Nicola, you look as though you're desperate to jump in. There's a question there about whether the year 4 children will be able to access it.
That was, we had a chat about this already, and we think it's quite hard for year 4. So it does depend on your children. But I think if it was mixed 5-6, that would be fine. But I think year 4 might be just a little bit young. But you know your children better than you do.
Then we have sorry, I'm just reading. So thank you, Maurice. I'm just reading your question. So you're the deputy head and the year 5 teacher. I think you'd be able to fulfill a lot of the functions of the SLT champion, but there'd be a question there around lesson observations, I think. So I think if you are keen to be involved, sign up, and we might have to look at doing something reciprocal with another school. Sort of buddying you up with another school, so you maybe go and observe one of their teachers and they come and observe you. But one of the, I guess, the key function of the SLT champion is to make sure that the teacher feels supported, has the time, has the release time. So if you feel confident as deputy head that you can do that, then I think that's fine. So Nathan, I'm now looking at your question. Year 8, oh, I see. So working with in an SEN setting may not be suitable for our year 5 class, may suit our year 8 or 9 classes. Would we be able to follow this programme and use it for a more suitable class? I think, Nathan, we would love to work with a specialist setting, but for the evaluation purposes, we're evaluating the impact on year 5 pupils, but very happy to talk further about how we might be able to support you to use some of the strategies. Okay. Bex, is there a cost involved? No, wonderfully, because this is a funded EEF pilot trial, it is completely free to schools at this point. Alex Davis, can I confirm whether the webinars and coaching conversations, oh, sorry, Alex, I should have said that. Those are all after school. So this sort of a time slot, 4 till 5 for the webinars, and the coaching conversations we arrange at a mutually suitable time. So that might be during someone's PPA, for example, or after school, whenever suits best.
Brilliant, thank you.
So then Mickey says, will the level of challenge be for those working well above the national average? How does the level of differentiation work? Data that was showed, how did that sampling work? The further report. Yes, I mean, Mickey, what I will say again is that's not the focus of the evaluation. So this was something that we were interested in looking at as a part of that. Did the teachers feel that it was having an impact on their pupils? I'm very happy to share the evaluation report with you. I'll just have to make sure that it's anonymized because there's I'm fairly sure it is all anonymized actually. So we can share some of that information with you. Nicola and David, do you want to take the question about those? How does it work for high prior retainers?
Yeah, well, in terms of differentiation, it says how does the level of differentiation work? it is challenging. The texts are challenging texts, but it's what's it called? Low threshold, high ceiling activity. So with all the way we approach texts is that everybody in the class can access it. However, the texts are classics in lots of cases, and also with the non-fiction texts, they're challenging and they're complex, but they're not, everyone can access them, but the challenge is there for your sort of higher attaining readers. And also the idea is that anyone who's a lower attaining reader or a more sort of average attaining reader is brought along with that, is brought up and is able to access the text almost at their level. So there isn't differentiation in terms of the text, that everybody is doing the same one, which kind of is what makes it work really as well. So that's how that works.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Right, scrolling through. Great. Thank you, Nathan. Got your email. If it is funded, does that mean that schools get reimbursed for covering classes for training? No, I'm afraid not, Carol. I'm afraid that the funding doesn't stretch that far. The covering, it means that you get the training free and you get the resources free and the webinars and the coaching conversations, but I'm afraid there isn't money in the budget for that. I wish that there were, but there isn't. So sorry. Okay, I'm just going to, that's my email address. So if any of you have any further questions, please do drop me an email. Otherwise, I really hope that that you come and join us on this exciting journey. It's when we trialed it with the schools in the East Midlands, it was joyful. It was really joyful. Both the sort of the lessons themselves are wonderful, but also the way that some really unconfident children engaged with the project. So you saw that funny little checkbox thing where there was a little boy who didn't like reading aloud, didn't like reading. His attitudes to reading sort of transformed, and he became sort of super confident and super involved. And there's something there about really being safely held, as Nicola and David have said, about having the modelling, the explicit teaching of vocabulary up front, and then opportunities sort of to practice echoing and then with a partner. So it doesn't feel at all, the children don't feel vulnerable at all. It's very safely held. And as we said, the schools who did participate are continuing with the strategies in the programme. So please do come and join us on the journey, and we look forward to working with you. Do get in touch if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.